And we're going to wait a couple seconds before we say hello. Hello, world out there. Good now, good whenever and wherever you are at the moment. My name is Ryan Erickson, contributing artist for Red 42. And to my right, left, whatever, this place on the screen is Niels Flagging. Hello, Niels.
Hello, Ryan. Delightful to be back in this BetaCodex live.
It is. Yes, it's been. We've had a little bit of a hiatus, a couple of weeks, and so I'm happy to be here. And we have a special guest today, Mr. Paul Tolchinsky, who Niels, you know from past experience and a long history and background. And Paul is a scholar of renown, and I can already tell it's going to be a fantastic discussion. And Paul, we will bring you in now, and we will get going with the topic of From TRIST to Today. So awesome. Welcome, Paul.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you very much for having me. This is a topic that is, of course, near and dear to my heart, so I'm looking very forward to it.
Paul, first, maybe you tell us where you're located right now, where you're sitting.
Well, in the moment, I live in Scottsdale, Arizona. I've been here actually, this is my 8th Christmas. I moved here from Vienna, Austria. So I lived in Europe for a number of years, which is where Niels and I crossed paths. In my search for interesting and creative people who were pushing the envelope, right? Our paths crossed.
Let me maybe add a few things about you first. But Ryan, you can also add, but some things that I remember, that I know about you, just to cover the basics. You have doctors.
I do. I do.
And you are certainly, I think, I would say, a veteran and a pioneer of the field of organizational development. Maybe not the first generation of organizational development, but certainly the second generation. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's true. My mentors were the people who founded the field of organization design, organization behavior, sort of organization theory and systems. Yeah. Those were the people that I found.
Yeah, and of course we want to trace your roots back to Eric TRIST and so on a little bit, to the socio-technical systems movement. But it's also fair to say you authored 2 books and of course many articles. And one of the concepts you are connected with is whole-scale change, which you authored together with others, Kathy Miller and so on. So you wrote a couple of books, many articles, and you have been working in the field of organizational development and organizational design for 40 years, more than 40 years, I think. Yeah, 45 years.
Yeah,
something like that.
Yeah, almost. Yep.
And
it
also
makes me sound old, but
yeah, some of us are.
Being an elder is not a bad thing. I think there's
true.
a lot of appreciation. I think I heard from some of your work as I was listening through. There's appreciation for the past that informs us in the now and informs us into the future as a pathway. So no shame in eldership.
No, and of course we should also mention that you, Paul, co-founded. Maybe it's fair even to say that you founded European Organizational Design Forum, EODF. And yeah, I think you are a star of the field of organizational design. It's fair to say, I think.
You're embarrassing me with all of the accolades. But, I think, yes, I'm the co-founder of the European Organization Design Forum. I'm a mentor. I am an elder, right? I've been around for a long time. And I think that what I most appreciate about what I do is connect the past and the future, right?
Yeah.
Which, because I think if you need both, right?
Yeah. Yes, which I think is exactly one of the things why we set up this conversation as well, because I think as a figure you so well represent this bridge between let's say one of the main movements of organizational design or organizational development. I mean, today, for example, I visited the city of Dessau, home of the Bauhaus movement.
Oh, sure.
And I would say that in a way the socio-technical design socio-technical systems movement is something like the Bauhaus of organizational development, the cornerstone.
Yeah.
I mean, McGregor was part of this, even Russell Eckhoff, and these figures were part of it. Of course, our mutual friend Bill Passmore
was a part
connected to that. In a way, socio-technical systems, you can trace it back to Kurt Lewin, I would say. Yes.
I mean, yes, exactly. You know, and the you know, and if you go to the topic of Eric Trist,
yes,
you know, Eric was a contemporary of all of those people, right? You know, when he came to the U.S. in the 1930s, he made it a point of visiting Kurt Lewin, right? You know, and so these people all actually talk to each other. We sort of think about them as independent entities and independent spheres, but there was a community of people around the world who were interested in the social sciences and interested in more humanistic ways of imagining and thinking, right? And so they sought each other out. You know, it wasn't like they were independently working. And so there's this huge connection and network, which in many ways was sort of one of my ideas about the European Organization Design Forum. But it's an opportunity for people to connect with, with provocateurs, thinkers, people who share ideas and beliefs, right? You don't have to feel like you're alone in the world when in fact you're not.
Yes, yes. And this, I think this is what makes socio-technical systems maybe or the Tavistock Institute, the preeminent institutions, historical institutions, if I might say so, of organizational behavior, organizational development, organizational design. And do you want to tell us a little bit how you came into the field and how you connected with that? How the hooking up?
Well, you know, I could tell you the short story. The short story is when I was thinking about going to graduate school, there was an opportunity to go to Purdue.
Yes.
But there was a catch to it, and the catch to it was that they actually didn't have funding for all of the students they wanted to bring in, but they had a potential client company called General Foods, who was looking for somebody who could work part-time for them and maybe go to the university. So the process of getting accepted into Purdue was actually interviewing for a part-time position as an internal, essentially human resource person, but for new product startups. And so the factory in Lafayette, Indiana, actually was the incubator for everything from Pop Rocks candy, that stuff that explodes in your mouth, to stovetop stuffing, to dog food and other things like that.
Yes. I think let me stop you a moment. Didn't Douglas McGregor also do consulting work for General Foods? Or am I mistaken?
Yeah. No, you're exact. McGregor, there was a man by the name of Richard Walton who actually designed the first, the Topeka experiment in the 70s, which was written up in Harvard Business Review as sort of the first socio-technically designed, self-managed, autonomous work system kind of environment. And it was a General Foods plant. And so General Foods was looking to do more of that, but not in new plants, in old plants. So the factory in Lafayette was an old factory. It had a lot of old ways of working, a lot of old mindsets. And so I interviewed for this position, right? Myself and several other candidates. I happened to be the person selected. And turned out that the consultant who was working with the plant was a guy by the name of Eric Trist.
Ah, that was Eric Trist already there. Okay.
And so Eric was there consulting. There were two different business lines on this site, and Eric was working with the management of both of them to experiment with and implement some of these concepts from Topeka. But the way we did it was with the new product lines. And so every new product line was an incubator for a socio-technically designed system, right? Each obviously different. If the product line was successful when they test marketed it, then we would scale up a whole factory or a whole production line. If it wasn't, we would say, thank you very much. That was an interesting experiment. We'll call you in a month, right? And so I met Eric in 1975 when I joined General Foods as sort of the HR person to the new product line startups. And for me, it was an incubator. And what does it really mean to think consciously about how do you organize people around machines? How do these two things collaborate? How is it that the person isn't an extension of the machine, but these things are integral parts of each other, right? And Eric would fly in once a month.
Uh-huh.
He would come in for 3 days. He would do his thing for 3 days. I would follow him around and carry his suitcase. And so I watched him for 2 years.
Oh, that was a long duration thing. Okay, so you were there the whole time, and he just flew in once.
Yeah. I was the guy who had to follow through with what he had recommended they should do. And so it was my job to sort of document what he did when he was there, create the follow-up plan for the next month. Eric never came, Niels, with an agenda.
Yeah.
He never had any idea what he was going to do for the 3 days that he was there, right? His first day was about collecting data. I'm going to describe it, and then you're going to recognize it. Yeah. The day one would be he would literally meet with the production teams.
Okay.
And he would talk to them. And and if you met Eric, he was 4'11", the most unassuming, frumpy looking person you ever imagine.
And in Britain,
right? As a person, his persona was, you would never pick him out in a crowd, right? He was a giant of a brain, but a frail, small man as a human, right? But he never presumed to know what we should do or talk about, right? And he never presumed when he left where it would be, where the organization system would be when he got back, right? So he never came with an agenda. He spent the first day collecting data, understanding where we were, listening to people talk about what was working and maybe what wasn't. He would explore with them how it was going, right? Why they felt the way they did. And he would co-create with them ideas and solutions and things like that. The second day, he would help them think through what they needed to do to make it work. The third day, he would spend with the management system, debriefing what he'd learned and what he discovered, right? And so, this is every month for almost 2 years, and what I came to realize is it's the epitome of action learning and action research.
Yes.
Eric was the embodiment.
Yes.
Right.
Which is the concept that goes back to Kurt Lewin, of course, and in a way, TRIST and Marilyn Emery as well should be mentioned, of course. They kind of applied that in McGregor.
Yeah. I mean, my way of describing Fred, because I only met him once. Marilyn I met more frequently after Fred had passed away, and she would come to the U.S. But Fred's job was to codify what Eric actually did.
Yes, because here was the more theory.
Right. He's the more prolific writer. I mean, when you look at the 300 articles that Eric wrote, probably more than half of them are with Fred, right? Fred had the gift to be able to put it on paper, and so he was able to take the experience and create something that actually brought it to life in words, right? That was their collaboration, right? Eric never had an idea what he was going to do until he got there and did it. Go ahead.
Let me ask you something. This is a personal thing also for me, because over the years, of course, I went into reading all the stuff. We should mention that the socio-technical systems movement, one of the greatest outcomes of their work are these 3 thick volumes, 3 thick books.
The anthology, right?
That sum up, I think, 30 years of Tavistock and socio-technical systems literature articles. fantastic articles among. Though most of these, all of these writings, I think, are available online for free on a certain website. We can link it. But
Exactly.
the books are also, it's worth owning them because I think they are the foundation in a way of
the agreement Eric had with the person whose website we're talking about is that he had the permission to upload all the articles as PDFs and put all 3 volumes online. Yes. So if you're interested in the history and the roots and you want to dive into it, it's an amazing collection.
Yes.
of thinking, right? Most of which I think is still relevant today. That's the gift. There's 2 different ways you have to think about socio-technical systems. The first is the Eric TRIST way, which wasn't a codified, routinized methodology. It wasn't you do X, then you do Y, then you do Z. Business model, operating model, day-to-day design, or something linear. Eric was action research and action learning. And so, he treated the system as a living entity and never presumed that it would be where he thought it was going to be the next time he interacted with it. And so there's a community of socio-technical systems thinkers who are social scientists and action researchers.
Yes.
There is another community that are much more routinized. They have their 10-step methodologies, and things like that. And Eric would roll over in his grave, right?
Yes.
If he saw most of those today.
That's why he's one of my heroes as well. Yeah, he was not a bullshitter. He was not a tool head, not a bullshitter, not an experimenter in a way. I think we should clarify one thing for those who are not so deeply connected to the history of socio-technical systems or Tavistock. Eric TRIST, I think at some point in the 60s already was hinted at this British coal mine that had a highly self-organized, highly decentralized, I would say, model of operating. So they found the ideal case in a coal mine of all places in Britain at the time. And I wonder, this is my personal question in a way to you, Paul, I wonder if that, knowing that it could exist, that it existed, this kind of model, this kind of organization, how that must have influenced Eric TRIST's style of working with clients and doing consulting. I mean, for me, for example, it makes a huge difference that I know that Toyota exists, that Handelsbanken exists, that W.L. Gore exists, because those cases, even though they are few, make sure that it's possible, right? So it's like
they become the North Star. They become the North Star, right? I mean, the coal mine story is a classic story,
yes.
And it's a continuous reminder about how all these pieces fit together, right? The relevance, I mean, what Eric found 70 years ago was this whole issue of how humans and machines and ecosystems interact, right? And how they create some kind of symbiotic relationship, and how if you, from a transformation point of view, if you ignore one part of it, the part that you ignore is likely to be the part that will cause you the most trouble.
Yeah.
Right. So how do you think holistically? How do you think systemically?
Coherently, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's, the coal mine story is 70% of all technology changes fail. And they fail because we ignore some part of the system in which it's being introduced. Right. So today it's software, enterprise architecture, it's whatever your views technology is, right? And so what always fascinates me is I think we keep replicating the same mistake that Eric discovered 70 years ago, right?
Which is
if you don't change the whole,
yes,
right? You can't change a part,
yes,
without changing the whole. And the part that you ignore is the part that will cause you the most trouble. So,
yes, which is I think this is interesting to cover or to hint at, right? according to that line of thinking that we adhere to, you and I, Paul, and of course Kurt Lewin adhere to it, McGregor, Trist, Emery, and so on, that it's easier to change the whole system than bits and pieces or the dust. It might often even be easier and faster to overcome the system than to improve or optimize it, or to bring in a different tool. But you have to think of it, a system in a coherent way, and I think that was what was invented by people like, of course, Mary Parker Follett.
Exactly.
I think they were, in a way, to me today, they are the first systems theorists. People who thinking organizations as systems.
They're the people who were able to hold all of the balls in the air and to see the dynamics and the interplay, which is in some ways a gift, right? I mean, I mentor a lot of young people who the notion of somehow trying to keep all these pieces in play, right, in a way that allows you to simultaneously look at the whole and understand how touching one part of it might affect another part of it, right? I mean, I think there's, Eric, Fred, and that generation of people had a more systemic, holistic approach, right? And in part, it was a reaction to your friend Frederick Taylor, our loving buddy Frederick Taylor. It was a reaction to the mechanistic, the humans as extensions. It comes from out of World War II, a real appreciation for the human condition, right? And
I also imagine that their work was a reaction to exaggerated conservatism after World War II in the United States. The McCarthy,
very much so,
right?
Yep, very much so.
Vietnam and the restrictions to freedom in a way that were perceived. And so on.
But there's two parts to the Eric story. The first is the understanding of the socio-technical systems, and Eric's open systems thinking model and framework. The other part of it, though, is Eric believed in his fiber, in his very being, that the only answers that mattered were those that were created by people who were doing the work, right? That, when Eric came into the General Foods plant, he didn't bring answers. He brought questions. And in the process of dialoguing with the workers, they co-created solutions. And so when I watched him, I thought a lot of consultants fly in with the answer. Eric never presumed to have an answer. And sometimes the management system didn't appreciate that about him, right? They're paying this consultant to come in, he should have the answer. But Eric never presumed to have the answer, in part because he knew that ownership and commitment only comes from engagement. And so his consulting style and his way of working was co-creation, right? That's, the other part of the socio-technical systems framework. Sure, it's good to have a systems model, and it's important to understand people, process, technology, and how all that worked. But that's not what really differentiates what Eric did. What Eric did is he co-created solutions that people could support, right? And that, ownership and commitment only comes from engagement. You support that which you help create. And so people looked forward to him coming because it was always an exploration and it was an interesting conversation. And out of it, they created solutions that they thought were really interesting, and he might have ideas and stimulate conversation, but, and so there's, and sometimes that part of Eric gets lost.
Yes, I think it's always hard to figure out how people in the time would have thought about their work. I find that very hard to, whatever I read about Douglas McGregor, for example, I find it hard to imagine how he did the consulting work. So I will ask you directly as a first about TRIST. And I mean, you were in a way his junior consultant, assistant, something like that as well, right? You work together in a way during those 2 years.
Yeah.
So with hindsight, how would you say, this might be an impossible question to answer, but was Eric Twist, were you satisfied with the results you achieved in the 2 years? Because when I started consulting, or until a certain point at least, I was always frustrated with the results. I expected much more because I knew that what was possible, and I didn't quite figure out how to accelerate the work to make it happen, to make managers, for example, adopt the things that I thought.
You know, I think that what I think, if I reflect on your question, I think what I learned from Eric, you know, in Eric's 3-day visit, you know, you would watch him interact with people, and you would watch the gift of that relationship, right? How much he appreciated, how much he listened, how valued people felt. You know, what I saw was that he gave them voice.
Mm-hmm.
He gave them voice. They had a say in how they did their work and what it looked like, what created for them interesting, meaningful, and fun jobs. He never presumed to know what the answer to that would look like. And every time we brought in a new production system, it was different, right? Because it's different technology, it's different configurations of people doing different work. So I watched Eric give voice to people and to watch them co-create. And then he would go to the management meetings, and managers didn't like him. Managers didn't like him.
Okay.
Because he didn't have answers. And he refused to be put into a corner,
yes,
you know, to tell them what to do, right? He wouldn't do that. No more would he do it with the managers.
So he really worked more with production teams and so on, and engineering teams or whatever, technical teams.
You know, but when I watched that dynamic, the management system didn't value Eric in the same way that the workers did. Right? That you know, and in part it was, you know, he was 4'11". He was unassuming. When he walked into a room, he didn't shake everything up. You know, that wasn't Eric's way, right?
Yes. Not very charismatic in a way, yeah.
Yeah, you know, and so I watched that and I thought, the lesson for me is what I took away from that is you have to have an opinion. Managers expect you as a consultant to have an opinion. What I figured out is I never have only one. I give you choices. I never give you the answer.
Yes.
Right? I give you options. Give you options. You know, the choice is still yours.
Yes.
You have to pick it. I have an opinion. Eric refused to have an opinion. Right? He was a Rogerian psychologist, right? You ask him a question, he would answer it with a question.
And yet he did the consulting work, which Fred Emery probably didn't do much, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And because I mean
Hold on 1 second.
the management system. You know, I mean, I said they didn't like him, but it's, you know, but he got results.
Yes.
You know, I've been working on this article about this facility in Quebec that's over 40 years old that was socio-technically designed in the early 80s. You know, and the question about sustainability, you know, what is it that's enabled this site to sustain itself? And the answer is it performs. You know, you can't, as a manager, you can't argue with performance and success. Right?
Yes. Yes.
You know,
the only way to sustain an organization is superior performance compared with peer organizations.
Yeah, right.
That's the only way.
And so the management system in General Foods, in this facility anyway, right? They put up with Eric. That's a little bit too strong, but Eric got results.
Yeah,
right?
and I think this is a theme that I feel that it is even in what I read about McGregor, that this guy, this Topeka guy, they got along well, but others at General Foods didn't want to know of McGregor. So that must have been a theme with those, I would say, early geniuses of OD. They didn't please the managers, right?
Well, and in part that's because, you know, the Topeka, if you actually went to the Topeka dog food factory, Is that where you want to go?
Yes.
If you read the article, if you go back and read the article and you actually understand what happened, it was a crazy work system. It made absolutely no sense. You could rotate from making dog food today to being the accountant tomorrow. There was no training. It was total anarchy, Niels, right? But it was collective chaos, right? So everybody was in it together. Everybody, the system worked together, but how it was designed to most people when they went in there, it made no sense. It was crazy, right?
Wasn't it? I recall you saying something that Topeka was a bad word inside General Foods.
Exactly.
That you couldn't talk about that place. No. It's
and in part because the solutions that were created in Topeka were so unique to Topeka that they wouldn't work anywhere else. I mean,
yes, supposedly, right? It never works anywhere else,
right? Yeah. And the problem was General Foods was mandating everybody should look like Topeka, right? Well, if you're a manager and you're getting pretty good results, and somebody tells you got to do something, the first thing you're going to tell them is to go fly a kite, right? And so Topeka was, I mean, it was like calling somebody's mother a very bad name, right? And I learned very quickly never to use the word Topeka, never to talk about the Topeka experiment, but to talk about, how could we make work better? How could we make things more interesting? How do we ensure, health and safety of people and all these other, to have that conversation, Ryan, rather than, let's see where we can.
Ryan and we had this conversation in another session here about that cases have never convinced anybody of making significant changes in the right direction to self-organization. Cases.
And a little bit of it, it's not invented here. A little bit of it, it's, not invented here. There's pride of authorship and ownership, right? A little bit of it is, from an organization design standpoint, there are no right or wrong answers, right? It's about what people own and what they commit to. And in Eric believed in understanding the interdependencies between the pieces and the parts.
Yes.
And how, but the co-creation part was enabling people to imagine how to do that, right?
Okay, so this again, from watching you and listening to you and hearing even today the ownership and commitment and engagement that has a ring to me of Peter Block's work about how we create community. That there's invitation, ownership, commitment, possibilities, and I think this also comes in the idea of dissent. We talked about Niels and I talked about dissent, a couple weeks ago, but that you create that bonding and that energy around doing the work with community, and we feel this community because we are engaged. We are making decisions, and how can you create? What is a better way to create engagement than to make decisions?
No. You're absolutely right, Ryan. I mean, and it's the key. Eric's fundamental way of being was to engage. He didn't know it. He didn't know any other way.
He didn't apply large group methods or any of that stuff yet, so to speak. I mean, that was not his consulting.
No, right? Yeah, and whole scale change as a approach to transformation in organization has its roots in two things for sure, maybe more. The first is this question about why do the few decide for the many? Why can't the many decide for themselves?
Yes.
Right. And when I watched Eric, the many decided for themselves. It was a small group, 20, 30 people maybe on a production line, but not 2, 3, 4, 500. But it's the same question, right? Irrespective of size, the question is, why is it that a few people, whether it's a microcosm design team or the leadership or somebody, why can't the whole decide for the whole, right? And
Yes.
and that, and so that was a fundamental question, right? Number one.
I think Eric Trist and Fred Emery and their Tavistock STS peers, they had this fundamental insight that you cannot bring about self-organization with method that is command and control.
It's inconsistent. Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
You have the change method, the organizational development approach has to be consistent with the nature of the result philosophically.
Well, that's Albert Chern said the method has to model the future you're trying to create.
Yeah.
Right. That's what one of his Chern's fundamental principles that he took away from Eric and from Fred was the process should be compatible with the end in mind.
Yes.
Right. So why would you mandate change if you want participative management? It makes no sense.
Yes.
Right. And so whole scale change came about because the question was, how do you engage the many to decide for themselves? Right. Couldn't you scale the process, the methodology, the thinking, the opportunity? The second principle was action learning and action research.
Yes.
The presumption that there's, certainly when you're doing transformational work, there are a set of questions that you ask. And maybe there's a sequence or a logic to the order in which you ask them, but I even let go of most of that. It's more about asking good questions and good dialogue, not necessarily, question one has to follow, question two has to follow question one. You should look at the customers before you look at the processes, or look at something else before you do something else. Why can't you do these things in a synchronous, simultaneous?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
To your point about speeding up the cycle time,
which is one of the things I have worked
strongly
on, making it happen in just a few months.
Which is exactly one of the things I most appreciate about what you do in Open Space Beta is you time box and you get things done in half the time, or even better than half the time.
Yes.
Right. Which, I had a client when we were inventing whole scale. His question was, why does change have to take so long?
Yes. Which is the crucial question. Why are we not faster? Right.
Right.
For 10
and
years.
And this is in the 1980s, and he's looking at production cycle times, right? And they're being forced to reduce cycle times and work with less inventory and get more done. And he's saying, why can't we apply? Why doesn't the same rule apply to the human system change management as it does to the production system? And I thought, it's a really good question, right? I think the answer is because consultants have always been taught or told that change takes 2 to 3 years.
Yes.
So as a convention, we're going to budget 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the question of human nature, with the assumptions you have about human nature and human capability of learning and changing behaviors. And if you assume, it takes forever.
Well, and I think that the timing too, and this is another thing that Niels, you and I have said, and I think that resistance to change is a myth. I mean, that was one thing that we talked about. And Paul, I heard from you, resistance to change is a gift.
Right.
And I wonder, I want to hear a little bit about, again, the time to change. Why is this change taking so long? And is that a resistance thing? And what kind of resistance is that resistance?
Well, I learned from a friend in Ferrari that Ferrari is all about speed, right? All about going fast. And what my friend in Ferrari said is the essence of speed is the elimination of friction.
That's physics, yes.
Right? That's physics.
Yeah.
That's physics. Friction is, in the human sense and from a transformational change perspective, friction is out of alignment, right? Some of us are going in a different direction than others. Some of it is, quote, resistance. I say resistance is a gift to be polished. It's a gem to be mined in the Japanese way of thinking about things, right? People who resist do it because they care.
And there
If they didn't care, they would tell you to do whatever the hell you wanted, right? You know, and right?
They do whatever you want because I'm out of here. I don't care. I'm not in. And this is the invitation approach. This is open space. This is open space beta, is that you're inviting people in to stand up in the middle of the circle and say, I care about this and I want this to happen. And part of that is because this wasn't happening. And there is a better way. And I am inviting you by being invited into the center of the circle to say, let's create this together. So
where it gets complicated, or maybe that's not the right word, where it becomes challenging is in order to create the space in which somebody can stand up and say that's bullshit and I don't agree, right? That creating psychological safety, giving voice to, you know, my old partner Kathy Dannemiller used to say, see the world others see. Not to judge it, but to understand it, right? There are multiple points of light. There are multiple points of view, and each person's truth is truth, right? So
he was a constructivist after all, right?
Right. You know, and I mean, and Eric and Kathy Dannemiller never met, but they would have loved each other, right? In the same way that Dannemiller and I always got along, because they both believed in giving voice to people, the good and the bad, you know, and you know, and if I have a concern about what you're doing, my concern is out of our ability to be successful and to get the right answer. It's not because, you know, I'm an opinionated idiot, you know, and I just want to be an obstructionist, right? You know, exactly. That's just not how we're wired. You know, and so Dannemiller we co-created Whole Scale Change in order to give voice.
That was in the 1980s, or was this still in
the late 1980s and the early 1990s? Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the very first large group meeting that I ever did with Kathy was at Corning Glass, in their R&D center, and I was doing a change management project, and Kathy had been asked to come in and help them reimagine their strategy. And she and I met in a meeting where they were proposing her project. And I thought, well, these two projects actually, they complement each other. You can't do one without the other, right? And so we should combine our efforts.
Okay.
You know, and I had no idea what was going to happen. But when 350 people all of a sudden get energized and mobilized in the same direction, it gets your attention. Right.
Yes. Then new things can happen.
Yeah. Things and amazing things. Yeah, exactly.
So that was how you started working together in that project. You met her at this project, and then you had a partnership for quite a few years. Can you
15? We were partners for actually 15 years until Kathy passed away 20 years ago, 2003. You know, and the partnership. I was looking for the answers to the questions that I raised a few minutes ago, right? How did the many decide for themselves, right? How do you get to the future faster, right? And it seemed to me that Kathy's way of embracing the whole system, right? It was Eric's way of embracing the small system, and Kathy's way was in a more holistic way.
Yes.
Right. She gave voice.
Yeah. I mean, let's also contextualize this. I think it's fair to say that in the 1980s and the 1990s, the large group intervention potpourri was invented. Marvin Weisbord created Future Search. Harrison Owen created Open Space, of course. Methods like Word Cafe were also created. Some of them substantial, some of them less substantial, one might say, right?
Yep.
Some of them more. I think whole scale change is more ambitious than others in the sense that system.
Open space and whole scale are very similar. They're slightly different there's probably more, quote, structure in whole scale, right, than in open space.
Yes. It's not as light. It's more facilitated.
Yeah.
Not as light. Yes.
Yeah. It's more facilitated. It's more consciously guided.
Yes.
Towards some agreed upon purpose. Right?
Yes.
And so, but in whole scale change, you can apply open space technology. Yes. And in open space, you can do the same thing with whole scale. They complement each other really, really well. Where most of the other approaches were more, I don't know what's the right word, more task driven. Future search is about creating a vision for the future.
Yes, it's more about strategy development, strategy deployment, maybe, and World Cafe is just about interaction.
Yeah, it's getting people talking to one another. It's about the dialectics of it. There's another methodology called the conference model by the Axelrods, which was their way of doing org design, right, in a more holistic way. The difference in all of those is none of them engage the whole system at the scale that we're talking about.
Yes.
Whether at the scale of open space or at the scale of whole scale. There's no limit to the number of people you can engage. I was on the phone yesterday with somebody and I said, the largest large group meeting I think I ever did in Europe was in Berlin in 2020, which was 1,100 people in one ballroom, 2 factories that were merging, right, for shooting. Now Bayer, and the belief was that unless you got the people from these 2 factories talking to one another before they actually showed up to have to learn to work together, right, that you needed to engage them. You couldn't engage small group. You had to engage them all. So, and her reaction was, I can't imagine having 1,100 people in the room, and we had breakout groups of 175. Yeah. Which that was her reaction, Ryan. It's like 175 is a large group, but in the context of this facility was going to be 1,100 people, so you couldn't leave somebody out. I mean, open space and whole scale allow for that possibility.
Yeah,
right.
Sure. Yes.
We lean into those things.
Yes. By the way, I should mention, Paul, that EODF Open Space Conference that was
in Amsterdam.
Yeah. I had the honor to organize it, to be the
co-host. And
that was 10 years ago, in Amsterdam. Yes.
And I was tired of doing conferences.
We were tired of the old schemes, right?
Right. And I approached Niels and I said, I have this idea. And I think most of the people in the EODF are going to think I'm crazy.
Yeah.
Right.
Some just hated the idea, of course. Yes.
Well, actually, the one person who hated it just refused to show up. Right. But which was fine. Which was fun. It was his choice. Right. Whoever shows up with the right people. And to this day, a large part of every EODF conference is still open space. Right. Because the wisdom is in the system. Right. People, Eric believed fundamentally that the wisdom was in the system. Right?
Yes, I think this is very close to this belief is what makes decent consulting possible, right? That you believe that you do not have to give that much insight to the client. You don't have to push the client that much. You have to tease. You have to irritate constructively. You have to create different ways of interaction and connection and so on, but you don't have to give the solution so much. You should be
that it doesn't absolve you from the responsibility to, again, we talked about this in beta consulting, is that to be a trusted advisor, with you have opinions, and that we will guide you, we will be with you, and we will prompt you with the questions that are informed by the practice that we are bringing to this. So
Paul, you reacted to that.
Trusted advisor.
It's not your mode of operating, right?
I'm not a trusted advisor.
Yeah.
I'm a provocateur. No, Ryan, I'm a provocateur. I'm an empath. Right. I believe leaders want to do the right thing. I believe everybody in the system wants to do the right thing.
Yes, me too. I just also think that usually they don't know what that is and how to get to the answer.
Well, we talked about trust.
It needs to be social process, social structure.
And you have to uncover it.
Social structure first and foremost.
Yeah, you know, I mean, people can't create what they can't imagine, right? This is one of the fundamental beliefs underlying whole scale is you can't create what you can't imagine. So one of our responsibilities as provocateurs is to bring imagination or create the opportunity for imagination to occur, right? Where people can create possibilities and out of all of that, scare themselves to death into a new answer that they can get excited about. Right?
And I think, Paul, you brought up a beautiful point that most of the time the reaction on the client side is, I cannot imagine that will work, or that I cannot imagine that this is possible in my context, in my company, in my field, or whatever. And I think the beauty of that response from the client, from a manager or team or whatever, is that pretty much sums up the problem. That the lack of imagination or the possibility of imagining a better future is what holds us back.
Well,
right?
that's what drives. I would imagine here that's what would drive an executive to say, "I want a case. Show me where this has worked before, exactly in a way that I want it to work here," and that's not reasonable. Is that going to happen?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've had clients, potential clients, who have come and been flies on the wall to watch somebody else's process, just so they can get a sense of it. You know, in the 80s and the 90s, because it was so unique and different, right? Clients actually made videos, right? 10, 12, 15-minute videos, more to use as communication tools, right? For maybe people who weren't physically able to get into the room, right? And so they could at least see what happened. You know, but and there's a lot of, you know, when I started proposing whole scale change, people would say, well, if you get 500 people in the room, you're going to come up with a sub-optimized solution. You're not going to get the best thinking, right? You're going to get you're going to get regression to the mean, right? You know, and I said that's true if you don't create opportunities for people to imagine what's possible, right? And you push them to the edges of their paradigm. You know, you say if you're not uncomfortable, you haven't thought far enough out.
Yes,
right.
You have to make, as consultants, we have to make the client uncomfortable. Following Kurt Lewine's adage, the best way to know a system is to try to change it. That's the way to actually know a system. Right?
Yep. Yeah, so, because then you get all the you get all the nuances, you get all the you get the undercurrents and all of that as well. I mean, I did a change where people actually had to vote on. I think they had 4 options of a new organization design. And there were 500 people in the room, and it was very clear that one group of people was going to vote for the minimum amount of change.
Okay.
Right. They were pretty clear that, you know, they didn't think we needed to go as far out as other people thought. And the conversation about engaging them in, well, what if we could push it a little bit further? You know, would you be open to that, and what would it look like? And how, what if in your worst fears we pick the answer that you least like, right? How do we make it acceptable for you, right? I mean, if the wisdom of the system is to pick something that you can't support, then what do we need to do in order to build your support? And how do we give voice to your anxieties and your concerns in a way that creates an answer that is better, right?
And to respect their opinion, to respect the fact that they have knowledge and experience, and that that resistance is a gift because they care, and they love, so
it's giving voice to it. You know, I mean, it's when I was doing the conversation with Jose a month or so ago, and we were talking about ownership, right, as a as a psychological state or as a share state, right? So, you know, ownership is about having voice, the ability to influence your circumstance. And if you don't feel like you can, then you're not empowered, you don't have voice. And basically, you know, you learn to keep your mouth shut, right?
No matter how many stock options you have.
You know, and I mean, Eric gave voice to the people who he thought mattered most. The people he thought mattered most were the people who lived at the coalface in that mine every day, right? Who were doing the work, making the products, delivering the services. You know, they were the people who were underappreciated and undervalued, right? And they're the ones that made the difference. And so Eric gave them voice and gave them the ability, gave them power, right? They felt powerful when he was there because he listened to them, right? And helped them think through how to make their dreams come true, at least in a small scale way in their work situations, right? That, you know, Dan and Miller could do the same thing. When you interacted with these two people and you left, you felt like $1 million, right? You felt like $1 million.
How do you? I mean, you as a professional with a distinguished career of
You're making me sound old again. Go ahead.
several years. Yeah, but I love it. I mean, I already have 20 years of consulting, which I think is a lot, and I feel old. So it's okay if you feel a little seasoned as well.
A respected elder.
And how do you think, Paul? What would you like to see changing over the next couple of years so that you can still benefit from it? How would you like to see the world we work in, the consulting work, the organizational development work, the client side? So, what are the things that you would like to finally see changing?
No.
Are you fed up with the profession yet? Not apparently not.
No, well, I mean, you know, I think one answer I think I got from you, which is about, you know, there's a lot of tribalism.
Yes.
Right? I think that's the word you use, tribalism.
Yes. Primitive
right?
tribalism, yes.
Yeah, you know, professional tribalism.
Yes.
You know, I think we need to get over ourselves and start listening to each other in order to be a more powerful force for change in the world. I think individually we do our thing, but I think we underachieve, right? Number one.
I think
that's
collectively we suck.
Right. That's
we are
number
not united.
one.
We're not united.
Right. That's number one. Number two, I think we have to unleash the magic in organizations, which is the subtitle to the book, right? That we did 20 years ago. You know, and the thing that befuddles me the most is we keep living the past, right? We keep replicating the past. That's the article that I'm working on right now. It's called Deja Vu all over. It's called Deja Vu all over again.
Yeah, right? Can you talk about it a little bit? Yes, about
and the whole point is that, you know, we're still having the same conversation about semi-autonomous work teams, power and influence in people. And we did 40, 50 years ago.
Yeah,
right?
It's Groundhog Day forever, right?
So we're either doing something wrong, because if we'd have been doing it right, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Yeah.
You know, and so we have to go back to, you know, what it is that's not working in order to let go of it, to get to a different future that gets us to a tipping point where the kinds of places you and I aspire to create are more the rule than the exception.
Yes.
Right. Yes. That's, you know, so I keep wishing for a tipping point, but I think we have to go back and look at my Canadian example that I'm working on. They've been able to survive for 40 years. They have literally transitioned the first generation of workers to the second generation of workers with the same degree of ownership and commitment and self-management. Right. And the question is, what is it that they've been doing for the last 40 years that's enabled them to get to the future with the same set of values and principles that they created in 1983, right? 40 years ago. And if we could learn from what's enabled them to sustain themselves, could we not find ways for people to take that and personalize it to their own situations?
Yeah, sure.
Right.
That was the idea of the beyond budgeting movement as well, to identify those cases and identify the principles from the cases, distill them, so to speak, to understand the texture of consistent self-organization and decentralization and so on, organizational democracy.
I mean, I think there's if we could get over ourselves and admit that we're having the same conversation that we've been, it's a circular kind of thing. Yes. Maybe we could get off the merry-go-round and get onto something that creates a different future with a greater likelihood of success. Yes, not that there aren't good examples. There are lots of good examples, right?
Yeah.
But they're not.
That is one of the reasons why we wanted to talk to you about your roots and the TRIST part of this conversation as well, because there's so much that we already know, that we have known for 30, 40, 50 years. And still, I mean, there are new generations of consultants, of course, coming into the field, and managers all the time, and people in the workplace, and in not being conscious of those roots means we start all over.
Exactly.
Same silly kind of
conversation. I stare at 6 books on my bookshelf every time I'm on a call like this. The first 3 we've talked about, the Eric TRIST anthology, the 3 books.
Yes.
Right. The other 3 are called, one is called The Classics of Organization Theory. The other is called The Classics of Organization Behavior. And the third is called The Classics of Industrial and Organizational Psychology. And these 3 books were all published in 1978. And they have in them all of the history and the roots that we're talking about, Niels, which young people today who are coming into the field have no knowledge of. Right?
Yes.
So they're
reading
replicating.
Helps. Let's say this, right? Reading helps. Yes.
So unknowingly they're recreating the same mistakes.
Yeah.
Right. And falling into the same old patterns. But if you go back to those books, in them are gems to be mined.
Yeah.
There are concepts that still matter today.
Yes.
Right. In some way, shape, or form. And if you don't know them, then you're at risk of repeating the same mistakes all over again.
Yes.
So that's the deja vu all over again.
Yes. That's always the feeling that I get from reading the Tavistock books, if I may call them like that. There's so many, for example, cell structure design, which is a concept that I co-authored with Silke, and I hope, Paul, you will soon be able to read the translation. And of course, many of those concepts of the concept that go into cell structure design as decentralized organizational design. Many of the concepts are explicit in the Tavistock work and in social technical systems. They are not fully explicit. They are implicit sometimes, like relative targets of measuring performance again just by actual. You can find it here and there in those articles, in those books, in those volumes. Or the idea of decentralization, of course. Yeah.
What you've done in cell structure design is take the root concepts and contemporize and modernize them.
Yes, and connect them more and so on. Yeah. Basically, yes.
Right.
It's not a. It's not a.
It's not one for one. Right.
Yes, it's not a total new invention. It's polishing and adding something to it. Yeah. Certainly.
It's pushing the roots in a way that has us thinking about, we don't want to do what we did in 1980 because the world's different. But the things that we did in 1980 that work, we want to embed into the nucleus of what we're trying to create, right? That's, I think, what we need to do. And I realize I probably need to.
We are at the 5 past the hour point.
I probably
thank you for taking the time. Thank you for taking the time. This was an amazing conversation, and when we should get back to have other conversations with you, if you like.
Absolutely, would love that.
Yeah. So thank you for taking the time today. Ryan, final word, or Paul, a final word?
I defer to Paul since he only has a minute.
No. You know, it's thank you for the opportunity to revisit my mentor, right, Eric.
Eric,
I try to live what I believe is the best of Eric every day in what I do. You know, and so being able to honor him, actually to be able to honor Kathy Dannemiller in the same
yes.
conversation about all this, right? These two people have been a huge influence on my life. So,
And you have been one in my life, I must say, some kind of a mentor. I think Bill Passmore, who you kind of connected me with, also has been something of a mentor, and I have to thank you.
we share. Bill and I share the same mentor,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Eric Trist was his mentor as well. So it's a pleasure to be with you both. Ryan, thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Paul, for being here.
See you again very soon.
We'll see you very soon.
All right. Talk to you soon. Thank you.
Bye-bye, Paul.
Bye-bye. Bye.
This was a lovely
amazing.
conversation, I think. I enjoyed it very much.
Yeah, me too. As always, and I wish we would say again, we can find Paul. He's very active on LinkedIn. The EODF, the European Organization Development Foundation, is a lot of work. I didn't even get to ask him about Cocoon Pro, which is another organization that he does, but very active, very much obviously in support of what we are doing with the BetaCodex network and the work the system approaches, because they are whole system change. They are whole scale change, and it's great to be able to honor that. So, all right. Any words? Anything? I have something that's happening in my neck of the world in a couple months with the Open Space Institute and the Peace and High Performance in January. Another whole system event or whole scale change event that we're looking to do. Niels, do you have any things you want to share with the audience?
So if you are watching this, comment on YouTube or wherever it is, and we will usually, if not always, reply. Yes, so we will be happy if you comment, if you start a conversation with us.
Yeah, as the YouTubers in the world say, like, share, and subscribe, because that helps us with the algorithm.
Yes,
blah, 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 blah,
subscribing to the BetaCodex YouTube channel would be lovely as well. Yeah, it's always good. Yeah, good.
Indeed. All right, be well, do good work, and let us invite the change we seek to make in the world.
See you all very soon.